Hello, and welcome to In the Limelight. I'm your host, Dr. Mario Beguiristain, film professor at the School of Entertainment and Design Technology. Recently, I had the opportunity to sit down with José Bahamonde, project director, executive producer, and writer for Qué Pasa, U.S.A. This television sitcom has an important relation with Miami-Dade College. Back in the 1970s, two MDC professors conceived the idea to create the first bilingual television sitcom in U.S. history. From 1975 to 1980, Qué Pasa, U.S.A. was produced at our local PBS television station, WPBT Channel 2. First conceived for a local audience, soon this TV sitcom moved to the national scene. We invited Mr. Bahamonde, also a graduate and retired professor from Miami-Dade College, to talk to our students about the show, his experiences, and the television industry. I'm sure you will enjoy it. So let's pick it up with what Tony said about embracing diversity. And I want to ask you the subject matter, right? Afro-Americans, Cubans, Anglos in Miami. Back in those days, it was kind of an explosive mix, no? One of the shows was before the Mariel boat lift and before the disturbances in Liberty City. The other one was afterwards. But I think tackling that issue so directly was very courageous. How did you come about the decision to go ahead and deal with this straight on?
Thank you, Mario. Actually, there's a 5-year span between the first show, Computer Friend, and There Goes the Neighborhood. You may have seen it in some of the show quality. Actually, the first year, we had to produce 10 shows with $250,000. That's about $25,000 per half hour. And the last season, we produced 5 or 6 shows with the same amount of money because the cost went up. I used to send my assistants to the local high schools and survey the students as to what is happening at home, what is happening at school, what is happening among your friends, what are burning issues that we should be dealing with. And interracial relationships always came up. So the first year, Luis Santero wrote Computer Friend. And the 5th season, I wrote There Goes the Neighborhood. And with the focus groups that we tested the shows, they said we hit it right on. And this is why it's so important that you're here. I want to just wedge in how proud and how the amount of gratitude that I have for having been connected with this institution, because you are a living experiment of interracial, interethnic relationships. It's for you, for your generation and your parents and your friends that we produce these shows.
And I understand the whole idea started right here when this was Miami-Dade Community College.
Exactly. An executive at WPBT called Manny Mendoza, Professor Manny Mendoza, who you may recall his name because with Vince Napoli, he wrote Systems of Men, which is the book that was used in the social sciences classes for many years. And Shep said there's HEW money for a local show, regional show, South Florida, to deal with the cross-cultural pressures of Cuban Americans in schools, the teenagers, basically. And Professor Mendoza got together with Julio Abello, who was then house director at Wolfson campus, and they put together a proposal to ask for monies so they could bid for a show. Together with other people, they rounded up a proposal. Manny was a fan of Norman Lear's All in the Family. Are you familiar with All in the Family? Yes, this was a show that also dealt with a different kind of tensions, right? In a a family situation of 3 generations. And he said, what if we had a bilingual sitcom to deal with this so we wouldn't have to sermonize? We could look at ourselves, you know, the old Shakespearean from Hamlet's monologue, hold the mirror up to nature. This is you, this is the problem. Can you see yourself, and can you process what is going on and try to solve the problem? So on paper, this was Manny Mendoza's idea. And fortunately, it was approved by the readers at HEW. That's the old Health, Education, and Welfare. It doesn't exist anymore. Now it's just plainly the Office of Education. And for 5 years, we went back for more monies. We were very lucky to have Manny from Miami-Dade and Julio Vello from Miami-Dade play a very important role, which was to get us refunded for 5 years in a row. I always say the production itself was on the shoulders of Bernard Lekuwick, my director, Luis Santeiro, my principal writer, and yours truly. We were there 60 hours a week putting the show together. But without these individuals, we wouldn't have done it. By the way, there were more people from Miami-Dade involved in Qué Pasa, U.S.A. Clara is actually a professor of Miami-Dade, an former professor, Gail Tompkins, who taught here at North Campus for a long time. Very good friends of Carrie Meek, who's also a very good friend of Miami-Dade, and she was a colleague of mine when I was director of the bilingual program, what is now the Inter-American Campus. She handled the outreach center. A lot of Miami-Dade students from Prometeo also played in the show. Violeta was a graduate. Marta was a graduate. Those were times when it was not easy to find bilingual actors, young bilingual actors, or the adults for that matter. And Miami-Dade was just a tremendous source of help for me.
The balance between English and Spanish, I'm sure you get this question a lot, but I think it's part of the key to the success of the series, which is that you can follow it if you only know English, you can follow it if you only know Spanish, and then it's twice as good if you know both languages. But how did you decide what would be communicated in Spanish, what would be communicated in English? Did you have to apply a formula?
Yes, actually, that was a big challenge. In the proposal, Manny had said this show is going to be 60% English and 40% Spanish. And when I was faced with putting the show together, I said, how do we do that? Now, remember, we were doing this with typewriters. We were not doing it with the Mac, the desktop, because now you can actually do word counts and even character counts. So Luis Santeiro and I sat down and wrote a script just for practice. And it was along the lines of what Luis had written before for Carrasco Lendas, which was a Mexican-American show from Austin, Texas, a wonderful show. And it was like, Buenos días, Mario, ¿cómo estás? Hello, Mario, how are you today? So it was like back-to-back repetition. And I said, that's not going to work in comedy. We got to come up with another formula. So we decided that whatever we set up and punched as a joke in one language would be finished in that language. And then something else, something different, would be presented in the other language. Then I would count all of the lines on the script and highlight only one language divided by the total number and see how close I was to the 60-40.
So there was a formula like that.
There was a formula, yes, very manual formula. And I also had monolingual readers. Dorothy Cheney, who played Powell's mom and who was also an instructor at Miami-Dade, was my reader whenever we were dealing with Black issues. I wanted to make sure that we were authentic and not being misrepresenting anyone or anything. And then I had Ted Janis and Angela Lucas, who were monolingual, English and Spanish, to make sure that the storyline was being conveyed. If you missed a joke, that's okay. We're going to catch the next one.
And the show was funded to be a local TV show. The idea was it would only play on Channel 2, WPTV.
Right.
But then it became a worldwide hit. How did this happen?
See how rich I've become?
Yes.
My Rolls Royce is out there. No, actually, we get absolutely no residuals or commissions from that show. And I am glad that it went national, and I don't mind that it plays even in markets that it's not supposed to play, at least not for free, because it's the message that is important. These were, Office of Education offered two kinds of grants, regional and national. And Mendoza, when he decided to go for the funds, I guess they felt that it would be easier to first go for the regional monies. National grants were heftier, much heftier. Carrascolendas, for example, that I mentioned, actually had a season of 39 episodes in one season. We have 39 half-hour shows from 5 seasons. So the going national spurred me on to try to put as much as I could into production quality. That would be, I thought, and I guess it's proven to have a pretty long shelf life, the ticket to some kind of permanence.
Let's talk a little bit about the climate today. Would you say that today it is equally feasible to get government funding for projects like this, or you think that's an era that's gone?
It's drying up. It's drying up. I don't think that the financial environment is the same. I used to be a reader for HEW, for the National Endowment for the Arts, National Endowment for the Humanities, and many agencies were able to put together proposals and submit them for consideration. Those RFPs, requests for proposal, have been shrinking because the monies have been shrinking. And for good programming, the kind that you do through your cable channel, PBS, that it's a difficult time. I'm sure that we're going to move on to another plateau of more resources, but right now it's a little dry.
Yes. What did you have to sacrifice to make Qué Pasa USA?
What an interesting question. Many hours. The first year, I probably put in around 60 hours a week. I'll tell you a personal story. I used up all of the china in my house. I would have breakfast using my sugar bowl or some plastic thing. By the time we finished, I had to put everything out in the yard and hose it down because I had no time to do dishes, do laundry. It was all go to the studio, go to the rehearsal, wear all the hats, because I said a little while ago that Manny and Julio put together the budget, but they were professors. They didn't know about television. I had no budget for makeup, hair, hardly any budget for swing sets, very little budget for additional talent except the cast. So all the props that you see in Qué Pasa USA, 90% of them come from my house.
You
and also
have great taste.
Not the furniture. The furniture did not come from my house. And also tapping on friends, asking people that I knew from theater to please come and do the hair for next to nothing. Carlos Gomeri, will you do the makeup? Antonio Gonzalez, who had been the wardrobe designer of a folkloric ballet where I used to work, dance, would you believe? They all came to the rescue. So it is a very good question. Everyone in those credit crawls sacrificed something. They agreed to do the show for very little money, for very hard work, and I am eternally indebted to them.
First, I want to say congratulations.
Thank you.
On a show that impacted so many Hispanic houses. Number two is you said 25,000. Was the budget you were able to work with per episode?
Yes.
Is it possible to get a breakdown of? I mean, did you use like a 3-camera setup, or just a breakdown of the equipment you used and like where the majority of your money went to and stuff like that?
Just to put it in perspective, we're talking about the 70s, between 75 and 80. $25,000 per half-hour show, and these were not half-hour shows. I guess they probably felt to you a little longish, and that is because we were not producing 24 minutes for commercial television, where the other 6 minutes or so are filled with commercials. These shows usually run 29, 30, 31. Sometimes we really had to sacrifice scenes, whole scenes, because we were running long. At the same time, the shows out on the West Coast had a budget of about $350,000 per half hour. So that gives you a perspective.
That's English general market television commercials.
Yes, Norman Lear.
Yeah.
The very first thing that I did when I was accepted by PBT and CAR to do the show was to go out there and find invitations to be in the studio audiences of Three's Company, All in the Family, shows of that type, the Jeffersons. And so got the idea of how the 3-camera setup had to be, as opposed to, say, multiple cameras in a talking head show. These cameras had to be characters. In other words, they had to move with the characters. They had to be where they needed to be to make a line work. The same with the boom mics. How were we able to pull it off? WPBT was the grant holder, Channel 2, because Community Action and Research was a new institution. Washington very smartly said, well, we trust you with the money, but we're going to let someone with the history of managing large amounts of money be the grant holder. So the station was the grant holder. And I had allies at the station who fell in love with the project. Grover Cole, for example, art director, he would give me any swing set that I needed for nothing. So that tells you how some of the money was never really an expense. Miami-Dade helped. In the Citizen...
Just to clarify, swing set, it's a set that's not the standard home that you see every week, one that you need to use for just one episode.
Exactly, like the church in the confession, or the funeral home in the farewell show, or when Joe moves out, there's a little studio. So those things, which would have been very expensive, easily $25,000 just by themselves, were contributed by the station and by the good folks at the station.
So you had to set up a 3-camera stage with audience seating and everything, especially for the show?
Yes.
Okay.
During the taping season, the Universal set, the house for the Peñas, was permanently set up. The swing sets were to a side, and that space was always open in case we needed it. And we also had to create a space for the audience, very much like where you're sitting now. That all had to be mic'd, and all of those microphones had to be operated, because sometimes the audience would say something or get a little bit too much into the teleplay, and we would have to right the microphone so it wouldn't interfere with the lines. There were 2 boom mics in addition to the mics that were hanging hidden on the set. You may have noticed on the first show, not a boom shadow, a boom, you know? And you know what? I had no money to pick up the scene. I had to say, okay, we have to live with it, you know? And that would happen often. Later on, we would send some of the audience home and do pickup scenes if something was really botched up, which was rarely. I must say that working with this cast was such a wonderful experience. I learned so much from them, Mario, especially from people like Velia and Manolo and Ana Margarita, because they were icons already before they worked for me. And I was the neophyte, and every week I learned from them.
Yeah, Velia Martinez, who plays the grandmother, there's something few people know about her. She was born in Tampa. She spoke perfect English. I met her back in, well, about the time when the shows were being finished. And I was really surprised to see that probably from everyone in the cast, she was the one with the best English and
That's right.
the most experience.
I wrote the dream to showcase Velia because in that show there's a dream, a nightmare actually, and the people who speak English are now all of a sudden monolingual Spanish speakers, and the grandparents are the ones who speak English. And many people said, but she speaks English. And I said, yes, she's American. She was born in Tampa. As a young actress, she moved to Mexico, where she had a successful career. And then she moved to Cuba, where she lived until she had to leave the island.
My question is, each character had a part or a moral or a message to the show. And my question is, what will be your opinion or message to this generation?
As I said at the opening, you are the living experiment of what Qué Pasa U.S.A. is about. I've traveled to many places, brought the show to many places, even India. Nowhere will you have the mix that you have here. Nowhere will you be rubbing shoulders with people from everywhere. And as I used to tell my students, learn to respect each other, learn to love each other for what you're worth, because in the future, you're going to go to a clinic and the doctor is going to be that Black American that you had in class, or you're going to go to the airport and you're going to be helped by that Nicaraguan who was in your class, or that Cuban or Argentinian or whatever. If the show has helped to raise consciousness, that would be my message to you. Do not listen to people who infect you with preconceptions and generalizations. That's tribal. We are all tribal, and we think that is survival, you know? As soon as somebody comes from another place, they say, oh, don't go around with those people because they, you know, or no, and you never give them a chance as individuals. We are really more alike than we're different. And this show, I think, proves that. We have a larger non-Hispanic audience than Hispanic. So although it was designed for Cubans, we have a following that is much, much wider. So whenever you discover yourself, and we all do that, generalizing, probe yourself, test yourself, because you're just probably following some little message that you heard from someone, and you don't really have the personal experience to like or dislike somebody. This is a wonderful community. This is a wonderful college. I have seen few places with this terrific mix. You know, these are going to be your neighbors and your friends and your colleagues for life.
I have a two-part question. I think Qué Pasa USA, like All in the Family and Maude and other shows from that era, was certainly needed. And I think it's actually still needed more today. So it's a two-part question, because the first question I have is, were there any efforts to do an updated version of the show for today's audience? And my father is a famous trumpet player from Cuba. He played with some of the most famous orchestras and all the great artists in Cuba. And so he really appreciated shows like Citizenship, where they had that number at the end that Joe and his mother sing together. And then the show where they put on the musical review. With so many films, classic films, being turned into musicals today, has there ever been any discussion about making a theatrical version or a musical version of the show?
We actually wrote, Luis Antero wrote a very good show. It was called Sabuesera Story, and it was a musical. And it sort of rounded up all the threads, the themes that we used to deal with in Qué Pasa. Unfortunately, 2 days before taping, we had to scrap the show. I guess because it was so big an effort, we wanted to do so much, that we couldn't pull it off. It is the only one show that stayed in the file cabinet. Would we do it again? I stay in touch with Luis all the time, almost weekly. And we always regret that we didn't have additional monies or new monies to do shows that would showcase highlights of life, like a Mother's Day show, a Christmas show, a Thanksgiving show. So the idea is there, but the money is not. And that is to answer your question, the reason why it hasn't happened. I've been approached many times by other venues that shall remain unmentioned, with unrealistic proposals of, will you do Qué Pasa USA for me? And it can be done. For example, you'll share the cameras with the news show, or this is going to be where the set is going to be and no audience. We'll use a laugh track. No, been there, done that, it doesn't work. So until something like that happens, there's a lot of new material. There are a lot of interpersonal new dynamics in this community. And there will be a wealth of thematic material to draw from. So I'm sorry, but it's not in the near future. And with Qué Pasa USA, now we're missing the grandparents. So we wouldn't be able to, we would have to reformulate the whole thing.
I wanted to ask you, how did you come up with that title?
That was not the original title. Good question. The title on the grant was Everybody Counts, Todo el Mundo Cuenta, which was a good title. But I felt that it was too long and it didn't have the rhythm and the catchiness. And I wanted a song. Actually, when I commissioned the song, I said, I like the sound of the Jeffersons. It's upbeat, and in the opening of the Jeffersons, you know their story, how they get there. That's the kind of song that I want. But we couldn't come up with an alternate name. And I remember sitting around with my assistants and saying, ¿Qué pasa que no sale un nombre? Why is it that we can't get a name? ¿Qué pasa? ¿Qué pasa? ¿Qué pasa USA? So I came up with the name just almost accidentally out of a discussion. But it had the rhythm. All Americans knew, hey, ¿qué pasa, you know? Who asked me about the money? You asked me about the money, right? You'll notice that on the opening credits, the question mark is animated the wrong way, right? In Spanish, we have two question marks, opening and closing. The art department did that based on graphics that a friend of mine had freely contributed, and they did it wrong. And we never had the money to go back and reanimate it. Cesar Trasovares, by the way, who is that artist, also worked for Miami-Dade College. So a lot of input from Miami-Dade. That's how Qué Pasa USA came about, out of a conversation. Which means, for you in film and theater and television production, never throw anything away. If you don't use it today, you'll use it tomorrow.
Well, thank you very much, Pepe.
Thank you, Mario.
This program is a true testament to the rich history Miami-Dade College has in our community. Leaders like Mr. Bahamonde demonstrate how this institution has been in the forefront since its inception in 1960 and how it has impacted the lives of many. Thank you for watching.